Hello, everybody. Today is November 29th, 2022, and this is the OLM Milestone 1 kickoff meeting. We have a limited agenda today with one topic. So we'll go over this topic, make a decision, and then the rest of the meeting will be dedicated to generating issues and moving the project forward. So a discussion point that we had recently was whether or not we want to do the issue generation synchronously. I scheduled these meetings to dedicate time so that everybody in the community could see how we're generating the work. There's been some feedback that they'd rather just us go off and generate the issues and then have utilize the working group time slot in order to propose and add these issues into the milestone one. And I wanted to give the community an opportunity to weigh in on that. At a glance, the benefit to this meeting is that hopefully every member of the community gets used to sees how we generate the work, is familiarized with it, and has the ability to do that themselves. On the other hand, if we go with more of an async model, we can generate issues much quicker. We probably don't need to meet as frequently, and then we can discuss any tickets that don't make sense at length and kind of hash out whether or not they get added in the weekly working group meeting. So I'm going to open the floor to anybody who wants to comment on this.
Can you click on the link through to the GitHub thing? Oh, there you are. Yep.
Sorry, I'm going to just take notes on this. I'm going to leave it here for now. But does anybody have any comments about whether or not they find this meeting valuable or want to continue doing it, or if they want to move to the async model where we just do these issues on our own and then bring them up at the working group meeting?
So go ahead, Kev.
Go ahead. No, you go.
Okay, I was going to say that I think these meetings are valuable to get us bootstrapped. I think what we probably want to try to do, and obviously we're not going to have this today, but like the next time we have this meeting is if we go off and make some issues async, then like we can use this time to kind of further refine them, and maybe we dedicate once a week separate from the work. I don't know, maybe not separate from the working group, but I feel like if we're going to try to Kanban and just like burn down the issues that we're going to have, like we're going to want to meet maybe as frequently as twice a week even, but like I kind of imagine that those like twice a week syncs would be like fairly lightweight, fairly, hey, these last 3 issues that we added to the milestone, I've got one of them done, here's the PR, it merged, hey, here's this other one, it's in review, can you look at it? And then the next time we meet, like, okay, great, they looked at it, that one merged, and then maybe we talk during that meeting about like, oh, and by the way, like here's one other thing that I need to add because I realized it came up and we need to work on it. So I kind of envision sort of that. It's almost, I don't know exactly what to call that, but it's almost like a joint stand-up / refinement that just happens like constantly synchronously. But then in the background, as we're working on PRs and issues and we're just thinking about this stuff, I totally imagine that we'll need to go and add, hey, Catherine just thought of another DEPI thing that needs to happen. So like she just goes and adds it to the project, doesn't talk to anybody, doesn't ask anybody. She just knows it needs to happen. And then if someone disagrees or thinks there should be a different approach, then we can have that conversation on the issue. And maybe we talk about the new issues when they're added, at one of these working group meetings or something. But that's just a suggestion, like whatever we can do to, enable everyone working on OLMV1 to be able to do it in the open and to have discussions in the open and to be productive. Like, I think that's what we want to do. And the reason I give that suggestion is that when we did SDK v1, that's essentially what we did, right? So like we'd have a meeting fairly frequently. There'd be a lot of really small, lightweight tickets. We just kind of talk about the current state of them and keep moving things forward. One thing that we could think about for this meeting So there was a chat yesterday going on, I think in the OLM dev channel, where in my mind, there's kind of 3 layers of refinement. One layer is like the high level, what milestone is next, right? Like that's a very high level. What do we want to try to do from a strategy standpoint for like what our next release is going to be or something like that. Then there's the lower level refinement of like a second layer, which is, okay, well, based on that milestone, this component needs to have this set of features, this other component needs to have this set of features, and this third component needs to integrate those features such that we have an end-to-end. So it's sort of high level, it's not very actionable. There needs to be some, further triage and refinement. And then there's the third level, which is like just the day-to-day, what do I need to do next to get to like solve this problem? So maybe what we do is we think more about like how to, I don't know, how to have those various levels of triage happening in the most productive way possible. But that's just my 2 cents. So anybody else who has different thoughts or opinions, feel free to disagree or agree or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree these 3 levels. And for right now, for the milestone 1, do you have the level 1 setting already, or some document? It says this is a milestone 1.
Sorry,
Yeah,
what is
Do
the
we
top?
have it?
Sorry, what?
Yeah, do we have that document? So that the one in a Google Doc, is that the one we define the milestone 1 target?
So milestone target 1 is defined in this dashboard on the project. So if you look at the meeting invite, or if you look at this document, there's a mention of an OLM V1 project. And within that, there's a milestone 1 where we basically define the main user story that we're following, and then a description along with scenarios that we specifically want to support by the time that this milestone is completed.
I see. Yeah. Okay, so that is kind of done.
Yeah,
I mean, level 1 is done.
Yeah, so the thing we want to build is defined. Now we're trying to define how we're building it.
Wait, sorry, how did you pull that thing up you were just looking at in the GitHub
It's
project?
project details, top right page of the project. You click that, and then this thing pops up. We would have a README landing page, but it doesn't seem like it's supported right now.
I think that's a topic we should talk about separately, but I agree, like the place to find the milestone isn't great, but I'd probably say let's table that conversation.
Sure. So Joe, can you repeat what do you think those 3 levels were again?
Yeah, so first level is like the milestones, right? So we had one meeting, we basically established what that first milestone is. So I think that was really productive. The second level is like the main sort of high level. It's like an epic kind of, but it's like a whole bunch of story. Like it's something that describes like a component or like a large feature or something that like we need to do to enable us to get to that milestone. And then the third level is like the actual day-to-day, very small scoped, very tightly defined, has a really obvious acceptance criteria. Like we know when it's done, we know whether it's done or not. And probably has like this third level, I would imagine like for each of these, there's 1 PR. If that helps kind of, figure out how big these things are.
Okay, so milestones, high level stories, and then like this is like actual implementation.
Work items or something, yeah.
It's probably.
So in my mind, like the stuff that we should do synchronously is probably definitely 1. 2 is probably somewhat reasonable. At least to spend time refining. Maybe we can generate stories separately, but definitely we should spend synchronous time refining them. And then work items, I think, could be purely async unless we decide we need to talk about it. And of course, like during the week, during the refinement meetings or during the working group meetings, like anybody can feel free to add a work item discussion to the agenda and we'll talk about it, right? So like all of these are acceptable to be synchronous, but like in my mind, at least, it seems like the most productive thing would be for the work items to be generated and potentially even like worked without having anybody having to like get the whole group of everyone in the community together to talk about them.
That seems reasonable. Yeah, and I think we never planned to do this forever, right? Like this was just get Milestone 1 bootstrapped and get people on the board about like what we were developing and give them an opportunity to kind of weigh in on some of the early stage design. I think moving, having everybody in this meeting to generate individual tickets like this, watching me type isn't probably the best use of all this engineering time. But with, once we get these fleshed out, going outside of this meeting, generating the actual work, and then, discussing it at these meetings is probably worthwhile. So that's kind of my feeling. So I think, actually moving to a point where we do support doing these and, the smaller item, like the implementation details asynchronously, I think that's going to be helpful because that's eventually the model we're going to have to commit to, right? Like, I don't suspect we're going to be we can't only create work items in a meeting, but leaving time in the meetings to discuss the proposed work item seems like very valuable.
Okay, so I don't know, this might be putting people on the spot, but like if anyone here knows of like immediate stuff that needs to be done that either already has a GitHub issue and it's just not on the board, or we need to make a new issue for it, that like is an actual like work item thing, like let's just dive right in. And if we don't know enough yet to do that, then maybe we talk about the level 2 sort of like, okay, what are the components that we still need?
Well, I think we still have these two. I would categorize both of these as level 2 items based on our definition, and neither of them are actually drafted yet. So we should probably get them to, both of them are in the draft state. So getting them into an actual issue state would probably be useful. And then looking again over all this stuff and then making sure that it's at least defined well enough so that we can create those smaller task items with, those 3rd level items would be a good use of our time today, right?
Yeah, I would just say like if folks are chomping at the bit to get stuff done, then maybe we could also think about like, all right, well, what are some things that we know we're going to actually do to get stuff done? And if there needs to be some behind the scenes linking it up with one of the higher level things, then maybe that's fine, but doesn't really matter to me. Whatever is going to be the most productive to help folks who want to actually write PRs, go and write PRs, that's what I think would be the most useful thing to do.
Well, so I just think we want to define at, the high level workflow for what we're doing in terms of defining the, like going through the operator API, we're using it to define a package that we want to install with Depi, and then we want to install that with Ruckpack. Like just capturing that workflow at a high level is probably useful, and then actually generating the work item tickets, that those 3rd level things you had mentioned immediately after those are defined seems to be like how we should drive this. Otherwise, we're like, and it's okay to drive stuff outside of that workflow that we know that we need to do, but it seems like almost every, at least for Milestone 1, every item should connect to one of those high level flows. Otherwise, why is it in Milestone 1? Like I could see, like we have this create a pleasant developer workflow experience. So that, to me, that means like any repo changes we need to make in order to make developing the solutions or the work to make it easy to develop those work items. Like that's like a good catch-all for anything that's kind of like, oh, we also need to do this. But if it's not related to either making it easy to develop or working on this workflow, I don't know why we'd have it in milestone 1.
No, that makes sense. Maybe what I'm getting at is like, do we need to synchronously fill out the contents of the issue, or do we think it's enough to synchronously agree on the titles? And then say, okay, let's delegate filling out that to do it asynchronously.
Yeah, I think that's what I want to do. I want to get these all completed. I want to have them like just define the high level workflow, and then we can all go off this afternoon, generate items that we think should be connected to these things. It might be helpful just to create one level 3 item so that we define how it's going to look like, right? Like, how do we propose that this is like something that does that helps us towards like this issue.
Perfect.
But once we do that for the 1, we can stop. We can then meet at tomorrow's meeting and actually have all the issues generated, and that's where we can continue the discussion and make sure everybody's on the same page. Does that seem reasonable?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, and so far I got Joe and Aki. Does everybody else think that sounds good?
I think it sounds reasonable.
Okay, so 1 second, I need to grab a charger, otherwise my computer's gonna die. Okay, so just looking at this, we had a ticket asking, or we will call this a work level 2 item. It's an operator controller can apply and manage RuckPack bundle deployments based on entity ID. So we don't have any of the acceptance criteria or anything else kind of mentioned on this ticket or any user stories, and we've been doing that here. So we can take a quick look at the existing one, and we can flesh this out now. So this is describing the process when, okay, so the operator controller has used DEPI to get a list of entity IDs. Actually, okay, let's look at this one. Can take a DEPI. Oh yeah, so we have the previous ticket was the operator controller can take a DEPI solution, look up each entity ID. And then it's generated an array of bundle images that needs to process. So this is actually the act of taking the bundle images from the entity IDs and then creating the, installing those entities using RuckPack. So Joe, I know you've done more work in this space than me. Do you have any nuggets of insight we can add to this ticket?
I think the general idea is basically that there should be a 1-to-1 of entity. So DEPI is going to say, I need these 10 entity I need these 10 entity IDs to have bundle deployments. And then the operator controller is going to say, cool, I actually have 9 entity, I have 9 bundle deployments right now. So clearly I need to go and create one. But then also, like, I need to make sure that those 9 are still correct based on what DEPI told me. So it's kind of this, it's a reconciler, right? So every time there's a DEPI resolution update, we should reconcile the operator controller should reconcile, and it should say, okay, look at those entities and create or manage or update or delete bundle deployments such that there's exact, like I've got that exact set running with a bundle deployment, right? So that might mean, so there's a bunch of scenarios, right? If someone went and deleted an operator, then that means that the next DEPI set is going to have fewer fewer entities in it. So we'll need to go and delete some bundle deployments. If someone changed an operator, then it might be that one of the entities has a new ID and we need to do a pivot, right? So we'll go and touch an existing bundle deployment to change its image to something else. And then the third option is, maybe I created a new operator object and now Deputy resolves, and now there's maybe there's 3 new entity IDs in my result set because of the root operator I asked for, and then that thing depended on 2 other things, right? So then in that case, like I need to go and create 3 bundle deployments. And all of these scenarios might happen simultaneously, right? Like during a given reconcile, one operator might have been deleted, another operator might have been changed, and a third operator might have been added. So this needs to be a idempotent and like always reconciling towards what the DEPI result set is.
Okay, so it seems like it might be easiest to kind of break this up into like, if the solution set contains an entity that does not exist on cluster, a new a bundle deployment is created. And then we got, if the solution set contains an entity that exists, then we kind of want to do.
So this is where it's going to get a little weird. The entity will either exist because we already have a bundle deployment that matches that exact image, or it exists because there's an upgrade. And so like the operator controller needs to be aware of the package, right? So I think this is mainly the second, if the solution set contains an entity that already has a bundle deployment for that package, right?
This contains an entry that has no bundle deployment for that package. If the solution contains an entity that already has a bundle deployment for a previous version,
I would maybe generalize that and just say, if it already has a bundle deployment, we need to make sure that that bundle deployment, the image field on that bundle deployment aligns with the image from the new entity lookup for that package. Essentially, this is saying, don't go and create a new bundle deployment for every single entity ID, because you might have an existing but different entity ID that is a member of an existing package, right? And it's hard to explain.
yeah, no,
I think you all get the gist, right? There should be one bundle deployment per package, but maybe that should be one of the acceptance criteria. Only ever one bundle deployment per package.
Yeah, that's a great one. There, only one bundle deployment is ever present for a particular package. Okay, so the idea is that basically once we can think about it from a fresh install perspective, where like that returns a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be installed. We should have a bundle deployment for every entity in the solution set. And then if stuff already exists and a new set of stuff is calculated, if there is no bundle deployment for an entity that comes from a package created, and if it does exist and a new version is present in the solution set, upgrade it. And if it does exist and it is no longer in the solution set, remove it.
Yep.
If an existing bundle deployment for a package, if the solution set contains an upgrade for an existing bundle deployment from the same package, update the bundle deployment. And then we go, if set no longer contains an entity, but a bundle deployment exists for a package. Same bundle. Spend a little bit of time. Only one bundle deployment is ever per a particular package. If a solution set contains an upgrade for an I guess this would be for an entity that the solution.
I think what you had there was good, Alex. Essentially, like what we have as a mapping, the operator controller is going to say like, I'm going to look up, we realize we're already going to look up the entity IDs. The entity IDs for the operators that we're going to install are going to have package properties. So we're going to build a mapping of, for each package, here's the bundle deployment I'm maintaining for that. And then we're just going to reconcile and make sure that the bundle deployment, a bundle deployment exists for every entity based on that package mapping from package name to bundle deployment. But I think what you've got written encapsulates that.
Okay. We basically get that. And then in terms of dependencies, are dependencies not, would that not just appear in the solution set? So
I think dependencies are out of scope right now, so I wouldn't talk about them. We could specifically, yeah, there you go.
So here's a thought. I don't know if you need to get into this right now, but then I think the first thought that came into my mind when I saw the last 2 points was, if the solution set contains an upgrade for an existing bundle deployment for the same package, update the bundle deployment. But what if that previous bundle deployment before the update is part of another solution set that was previously spit out, or is part of an existing solution set, and then updating this bundle makes that previous solution set or encroaches on that. Similar thing for the last one, right? I don't know if what we did for the current resolver package, I don't know if solution sets like that are even allowed from the DEPI side of things. But if that does, is the operator controller making sure that it's not stepping on existing solution set and breaking existing installations?
So
So
all of this, Joe, you can go.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I was just going to say that like in the new world, everything is scoped at the cluster level. So the operator API should consider, there should only ever be like one solution so that the operator API is even concerned about. So like we no longer have to worry about something breaking something else because everything's considered all at once. And if it's unable to meet all the constraints, it's going to fail and we just won't move forward. If that's been my impression, but
Yep. Yeah, and I think like so I imagine that like the operator controller, when it runs, it'll get events from so we'll need to think about when is it going to reconcile. And this is maybe out of scope of this particular story, but just to kind of set the stage. It's going to reconcile when a new operator object gets created. It's going to reconcile when any new changes happen in the entity set that DEPI knows about. And it's going to reconcile when there's any changes to any bundle deployments at all, right? Like those are probably the 3 cases where a reconciliation happens. And so what's going to happen is like every single reconciliation, we're going to say like, all right, let's look at all the operator objects and let's go ask DEPI to do a resolution. And DEPI is going to do a resolution. And probably more often than not, like the operator objects haven't changed. So the DEPI resolution is probably the same. And we're going to go and just, make sure that everything looks good. But then the next resolution, maybe a new entity gets added, and maybe that causes the resolution to change. So then we're going to make sure that what's reflected in the set of bundle deployments also reflects that new entity if it matters. Or if a new operator gets added or an operator gets deleted, then like that's going to also result in another resolution from DEPI. And if that resolution set changes, then we'll apply those changes to the bundle deployments that exist. So it's always basically like input is operator objects and entities, and output is bundle deployments. And we're always making sure that those are in sync.
So
Does that answer the question, Anik?
Yeah, it does. I think that also brought up a interesting other point that Kevin brought out. Again, I don't want to take us in a detour. We can probably, but it's worth at least mentioning the conversation that we just had in the chat. That's probably a detour though.
so
I think so. Kevin's comment, I think, is basically you've reached the head of what's possible given what you said you wanted, right? So if one operator can't upgrade, if the other dependencies mean that no other things can upgrade, then no other things can upgrade. But I don't think it means that like one not being able to upgrade means nothing can upgrade. Like there might be some other things that happen in resolution that say like, oh, well, for whatever reason, operator A conflicts with, you can't do an upgrade of operator A because the upgrade conflicts with something that exists. That doesn't mean I can't keep upgrading my other operators as long as they're not dependent on operator A or the operator A's upgrade.
So that's not totally true, right? Like that works in the case where the reason we're not upgrading is because there's no valid solution to select a new version. But imagine the case where something about the cluster changed. And that means that the current solution set is something we couldn't resolve for anymore, but just for that one operator. That means that everything on the cluster can't get upgraded because we can't select a solution set that includes the version of the operator that's now in an invalid state, which is actually like, it's a case that happens pretty frequently with the install plan API. For example, the case where you upgrade your cluster and now you're in a version where the operator that's already installed is at a version of, it has max cube version at some value that we can no longer reconcile against. That's going to put you in a state where no operator can update until you specifically do something to your cluster to allow that operator to update out of the problem.
It seems like what's currently installed is also an input into DEPI's resolution, right? So we can look at upgrade edges. But if you have something that's currently installed that violates an existing cluster constraint, all that means is that DEPI will never tell you that, will never give you a solution set that includes the thing that's currently installed. But that doesn't preclude DEPI from saying, oh, but there's an upgrade edge that you could take right now where that upgrade edge resolves that conflict for you. So actually there is still a solution set here. You just have to take this upgrade to get to a point where you're not in conflict.
Right, but in the case where there isn't a path forward, right? Like
yeah.
there's no, right? Like the only way you could potentially pull yourself out of this is have the resolver be able to separate context and do separate resolutions, which is something that I don't think we've ever really explored in a lot of detail because it's a pretty hard problem to solve for.
Yeah, I mean, part of this gets into pre-flight checks and like accounting for all of the different changes that might happen before those changes are enacted, right? Like we don't have anything, well, we kind of have some checks in OLM v0 that say like, the cluster's not upgradable because this operator said it can't support that new cluster. So I guess I agree, but maybe we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know that this is a problem we need to solve for right now. I think there's some different options we have for potentially solving this. One which potentially puts the cluster in this situation, right? Like you could imagine oh, I'm in a state where this operator is preventing other operators from being installed. Well, we can just have a force option to forcibly upgrade other
Right.
versions in that
Right.
case, right? Like there's ways around this. And I think we can put it out of scope for now. I just wanted to call it out in the chat. So sorry.
Okay, so just to recount. I just called this out of scope. Where we basically, like a cluster I'm just going to call it a cluster constraint for now, but some outside constraint invalidates an existing bundle deployment. And then I gave an example where operator foo supports clusters at version 1.24. The cluster has been upgraded to version 1.25. All resolutions are effectively broken because the existing install and subsequent upgrades are invalid. So I just called that out as something we're not going to worry about right now. I don't think that's a milestone 1 problem, but definitely something we need to revisit at some point.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Another example would just be like a package gets removed from the catalog that you've said you want. Like there's no solution that will include that package because that package doesn't exist, right? So now we can't resolve. So maybe that's like a more straightforward example of the thing that we're not worried about. Like I think what that means for this milestone is, okay, like no more, like we're going to keep trying to resolve and we're always going to fail. And we're going to tell you that the failure is because we couldn't find the package and therefore no upgrades happen. And I think that's a reasonable answer for right now.
Yep. So should we add that under acceptance criteria? Like if a package is removed, we like upgrades are broken, or is it just fine?
No, I think we should focus more on what we want to see, not what we don't expect to fail or whatever, right? Like, I guess like if we're going to demo this, then I would say like, all right, well, show me that when a new operator is added, that we have a new bundle deployment. Show me when we delete an operator, we get rid of the bundle deployment. Show me that when there's a new upgrade for that operator from the catalog, that the bundle deployment updates, right? Like that's the demo. Everything else, like we don't need to demo anything else. So if there's other bugs that are, shortcomings, that's fine, because that's not what we're trying to solve, in my opinion.
I think that looks pretty good. Yeah. Look at that, beautiful. And then given a solution, the operator should ensure that the correct bundle deployments exist. It's not really a user story, but I'm going to leave it like that for now because I think it captures what we need. Cool. Yeah. Take comment. So I think this. Oh, sleep. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that we can create this one. Does anyone have any last minute comments? I see some new messages. What you're asking for? Previous we say. Okay. So this is a great point, by the way, Onik. Like we lose this, but so this will have to be addressed at some point. I think we call that out here. So I'm going to convert this to an issue and assign it to the operator per project or operator controller project. And I'm going to label it with OLM P1 milestone 1. Boom. And there we go. So that gets us basically all the way done. Those are the 4 level 2 stories that we discussed earlier, right? So we now have created an operator CRD that allows us to say a package that we want to install. Actually, I can edit this because we removed the catalog requirement. We then have operator controller uses deputy to find the solutions. So this is the operator controller using the DEPI framework to find out what to install. This is the act of finding the entity IDs and figuring out what needs to be installed, right? And then finally, we have the actual resolution in terms of, hey, this, how do we make sure that the set of stuff on cluster matches the set of stuff we found out we need to install? And if we do all that, we have a working milestone 1. I do think we should probably flesh out what this looks like down here. If we want to do that now, we have 14 minutes. Are people okay doing one more? Or
Yeah,
should
let's
just
do this one because I think this is important.
oh, that's a reason to do it to me. Cool. So this is more of just like it's almost like a high level like catch all, right? So what exactly do we want to capture in this ticket? Like what are some things as we're developing these individual, you know, as we're working on milestone 1, what are some things that we should prioritize in order to make the development workflow pleasant? Does anyone have any suggestions?
I would say the main suggestion I have is that we have tests that, well, we bootstrap some tests so that it's easy for contributors to add tests for the features they add. And then we also have makefile targets that make it easy to run both unit tests and end-to-end tests. And we run those same targets locally and in CI so that there's no diff between what happens locally and what happens in CI.
I'd also maybe like us to standardize those makefile targets across all of the different individual components, just because right now I think some of them are different and that's kind of annoying to have to remember which project you're in.
Okay, so let's start with that one. Standardize makefiles across DEPI, RUCPAC, and operator controller. That seems super reasonable. Okay, check marks.
For end-to-end tests that are going to utilize all 3 of these tools, are we going to put tests for that in like the operator controller repo, or should we have a separate repo?
That's a good question.
I think we would have end-to-end tests for each, right? And operator controller depends on DEPI and RUCPAC existing. So probably that the end-to-end test in the operator control repo will install DEPI and RUCPAC and then run whatever end-to-end tests we've defined for that repo. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
So yeah, I think operator controller is definitely the point where we want to.
That gets into
reinstall.
One of the bullet points about the make file, like when you run make E2E, that should it should download this. We should have specified versions of all of our dependencies, both test dependencies and runtime dependencies, right? So like when Catherine runs make E2E on her machine and I run make E2E on my machine, we should use the exact same version of kind, the exact same version of env test, the exact same version of, you know, all of the, you know, any binaries or anything that we show out to, we should make sure that the makefile ensures that we're running the exact same setup. That way we don't get into the problem, the classic problem of, well, it ran on my machine.
Okay, so as we're defining these makefile things, I'm going to define them as targets and then descriptions of what we'd like to see. Okay, so I got E2E is one, and it runs a set of E2E tests. Should ensure that all binaries are at specific versions.
You can also make a note that RUCPAC is a good example of that.
Now, does that apply just to that target, or should it apply to all targets?
Anything that's going to shell out to anything else.
Sorry, what do you mean by shell out?
Really, like the makefile is just going to call a bunch of other binaries, right? Like either we call the Go compiler, or we call Golang CI lint, or we call imtest, or we call Go API diff, like whatever it is, we should make sure that the makefile or some other file in the repo specifies when you're running Golang CI lint, this is the version to run. When you're running Go API diff, this is the version. Like for every single thing that we possibly ever call from a makefile, we pin the versions.
I don't know how feasible it is to have a makefile like manage your Go installation for you.
That one, I don't, yeah, Ruckpack doesn't manage the Go installation, so
Well,
that's
But it
probably
can check
fine.
the version. Shouldn't it be at least check the version number?
It could do that, and it could just fail. I
well,
don't,
if you wanted to do that, I feel like the easiest way to do that would be to do all of this in a Docker container. So maybe running the makefile task like actually like pulls a Docker container that is also used for the CI.
then you've got to
Well,
maintain a separate Docker container.
I know, but like if you're gonna do that for CI anyways, which might be a good idea, I don't know, something to think about.
I think what Catherine said is probably what we should do, which is like, let's go look at Ruckpack and just use that as an example. And if we think there are things in Ruckpack that aren't great, then we'll iterate on it. But I feel like the Ruckpack experience is pretty good.
Just curious, is any sort of earth file? They're like a make file like kind of thing that use it, like pretty much does what Jonathan was mentioning, where it pulls everything into a Docker container, and you can use that same makefile to run. It runs everything as if it's running in CI, but it gives kind of like a Docker. It's like a combination of a Docker makefile kind of experience. I can share a link if anyone's interested in looking at that.
Kevin just shared in chat that they think giant makefile do all the thing tasks are too brittle to be valuable, and then mentions that, you know, lots of stuff doesn't work on OS X, which I would like to echo. I'm also on OS X, and lots of stuff is difficult to use or has bugs, which switching to a Docker container would fix that.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm not opposed to that, but I feel like I've seen cases where if you build everything in a Docker container, then you can't make use of anything that's already cached locally very well. And you end up like your builds take a lot longer and your tests take a lot longer, and you've got to re-download stuff potentially.
Right. You potentially can't make use of hardware too.
Yeah.
So it gets a lot slower.
I think to solve the problem of like giant makefiles and do all the things, like I think we just need to be opinionated and say, like, if you're developing for Ruckpack and Deppy and operator controller, like here are the tools we use. Like we use kind, and therefore like our makefile will automatically download kind, will automatically create a kind cluster for you, will automatically set up your kube config environment variables. Like I think we can do all that. And if someone says like, hey, I tried to run this on Mac and it broke. Okay, well then let's go. That's a bug. Like it should work on Mac and Linux. So in my opinion, that's just a bug that we go fix in the makefile. But
So you think that should be an explicit ask? Make it run on?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it should work on M1 architecture as well.
Now you're
which Ruckpack does, because I have a Mac M1 and it works.
And new hires such as myself, I'm from Red Hat, get M1 Max. So yeah. Actually, I do have one other request. If this is a test target, could we have test in the name of the target some way, shape, or form?
That's an interesting point. So, so on-cluster operator tests are pretty heavy, and we usually separate. Like we have a unit test, we have E2E tests, and I really wish we took more advantage of like generating good unit tests, so we didn't have to create such a robust E2E test portfolio. Because right now, like OLMs takes on the frame of an hour to run, which is it really slows down development cycles. So we do separate those. I think traditionally we used like E2E and unit as our makefile targets. We could have a test target if we wanted to, that like encompassed everything, but those
Well,
are
no,
very
I think
different
some of
tests.
them. I think the question was, could we just have the word test in the name? And I think some of them do. That's why I wanted the standardized make files, because some of the projects use test E2E or E2E test, and some just use E2E. And so if we can just standardize it across the board, and like I'm totally fine having it like test E2E or E2E test or whatever, like having test in the name, in the target name. But yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
thank you,
just,
Catherine.
is there ever a point where E2E doesn't imply a test, or is it just like, does E2E not imply test for outside people? 'Cause-
Personally, what I like about having test in there is it makes it a lot easier when you're trying to find that section in the makefile to modify it. You can just search test and you just jump right there.
Okay, I'm up for that. Test unit. Can we add a unit test make target to this list of things we want to ensure exist here?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Alex, on your point about E2E taking a really long time, I 100% agree with you. And I think we could, if we're diligent, we could build env tests that are somewhat more, they're kind of integration tests more so. And you can use Ginkgo or whatever test framework you want that's like directly in Go, rather than spinning up like a full kind cluster and building images and pushing. So one good example of a repo that has pretty solid, there's like tests for the reconciler essentially. So you can basically like stand up env test and then create some cluster state as part of your test setup, and then call reconcile, and then do a bunch of assertions about like what happened during that reconcile call. And you can do all of that in sort of a unit test style setup, rather than like running your controllers and then kind of observing the outside. It's nice because then you can very finely tune control. Okay, run reconcile now, make some changes, now run reconcile again, and you can really kind of control. You don't get the tests of your watches, but you can control what happens during reconciliation.
Yeah, what is this tool called again? I know like QBuilder uses it. Well, it spins up its own private API server. Is there some other tool you're talking about?
It's just called env test. Yeah, essentially it stands up an API server and an etcd, and it gives you a client that can talk to it. And it's all it's for the entire suite. So you get one cluster per run. So you have to clean up after yourself. And you don't have a controller manager there. So like if you create a pod, like, okay, you got a pod sitting there, but nothing is going to run it. If you create a deployment, nothing is going to reconcile that deployment and create a replica set. But that's probably fine, because you don't really care about that. What you care about is like, my reconciler created or updated the bundle deployment. And then that's all it really needs to test. And there's probably some other tests, which is like, oh, well, my bundle deployment status changed, but you can also simulate that sort of stuff too in separate tests. So it's called, I think what I would say, you're not going to do a separate test for it. I think it's just part of unit tests probably.
I see.
But basically what I'm saying is it's a way to decrease the footprint of your E2E, because you can do a lot more E2E-ish sort of stuff if you use env test during your unit tests.
Yeah, so help clarify if anyone's still confused with what Joe's saying. I'm creating unit tests for the dynamic cache stuff that I've been working on, and because that uses informers and stuff, and is basically like a full cache that would be used in an operator, I'm using env test to create like a super thin API etcd server that's used to mimic, the Kubernetes cluster that I would be using in an E2E test, but using it in strictly like the unit test format. So it's running as unit tests, and the unit tests, it takes slightly longer than they normally would because it spins up the API server and etcd and all that kind of stuff. But it's a lot thinner than doing it all in an E2E test.
Okay. So, okay, that sounds sweet. Yeah, I've seen that in like the newer controllers I work with QBuild, or I built with QBuilders, so that's awesome.
There's another aspect of this too, Alex, which is builds and releases, which we could separate into a separate issue, but it's all part of this sort of like let's just make all of this stuff super easy, right?
Speaking of super easy, one thing we've been running into for SDK that if you're starting from the ground up, it might be easy to try and avoid is making sure like the entire process is documented in one place and trying to make it so that like permissions that are required to actually do the release are minimal and hopefully can be edited in one place, or at least are kept track of in one place. Because like we've got like a netlify thing and like a bunch of different stuff that you have to have access to in order to actually cut an entire release.
I'll second that, and I'll go further and say that the actual release instructions should be get tag, get push, tag. And then all like that should kick off everything. If it's
I imagine automating it would alleviate a lot of the permissions issues.
Yeah. If we have a more, so I know SDK has a more onerous process because there's like a release commit, and then you have to lock the master branch, and you have to do this and that. I think that was probably, there's some reasons for that are technical, but I think if we start out with the assumption that the release process is pushing a tag, then we can save ourselves a lot of pain.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, I created a new, so suggestions, good unit test. We're gonna try and standardize make files across everything. We're gonna document the contributor process, which is gonna include calling out the release process and permissions required for certain workflows. We are then going to
so typically I've seen release and debug to be, you build a debug version, you build a release version. You don't tend to publish a release version with a release target. You build a release target, which then gets pushed. And build would be build a debug version for debug could be building a debug version, which would be also the binary. So it depends upon how you, I usually see build, debug, build, release.
Yeah, the other point I'll make on that topic is that we should do effectively like a dry run of our release builds, and it's release builds effectively. Like we're going to build the binaries, we're going to run the Docker build commands, and we're going to have images that if this were a tag, it would be pushed. And I think we should, and Ruckpack does this, like we should do that on every single PR. That way, like we know if our release is going to be broken, and we know if like we make a change to any of that machinery in a PR, we can see that, oh, the release is going to be broken because I changed something that affects the release automation.
Okay, so just to follow up on this. So we got the debug, which builds a debug version of the product. We have a build target, which just builds the binaries. And then we have a release target, which builds a release version of the project. And then we want to add a note that saying a PR should fail if this target fails. And then we actually need like an actual push release option. Joe, you had mentioned some like tag push. What were the make file commands you wanted?
So we use Go Releaser in Ruckpack. So we should probably just do that here too. And with Go Releaser, you can tell Go Releaser, this is a snapshot build versus this is a tag build, and it kind of figures things out on its own. So I think that's been a success, and we've had really no major issues with it. So I think we just keep using Go Releaser unless someone else has a different idea. We don't have a debug target in any of the repos that I'm aware of. So I would probably say like, get rid of that unless we find that we need it, but I don't know.
Well, that could be like the remote debugging thing would be a fun thing to have.
I mean, effectively it would be the default, not the non-release build. So you
I
either have a
see.
debug build or a non-release, a release build and a non-release build, which usually I've seen as debug. And build, I've never seen a build target. That's usually like just kind of the default. And also, we should note which one here would be the default target.
I think what we've got set up in RuckPack is if you run make with no target, it prints out like a sort of overview of what all the targets are. So it's kind of a help output.
That's completely fair. We should at least specify what make without any target does.
This is what we're doing. Running make alone should print out which targets exist.
Yeah, there's like some magic incantation that KubeBuilder had that is like a meta thing that parses the make file, and you can add comments in certain places and it prints a nice little, this target has this description and this other target has this description. And you can, if you don't have a description for a target, then it won't show up in the output. So it's a nice way of like highlighting, here's the ones you're probably interested in.
Okay. On that note, I think we're kind of at time, so I don't want to go too much deeper into this right now. I think this is a good starting point, and then we at the beginning of the meeting we expressed that we wanted to get these high-level workflow tickets kind of done, and then individuals can create, the issues related to them out of sync, and then we can discuss them at the next meeting. So does everyone agree that this is a good stopping point? I'm just gonna, one thing, I'm gonna convert this to an issue and apply it to the operator project. It kind of spans everything, but I think this one can probably just be, it needs to be stored to a repo, and I think operator controller is probably the right repo. Any objections there? Oh,
I think it's fine.
cool. Boom.
Alex, the only other comment I would have is we could also look at it from a RuckPack perspective, which is like, let's go and update RuckPack to be what we want it to be. And then we can just copy that to the other projects. Because that'll be a smaller lift. Or it could be like, oh yeah, this is exactly what we want, we're good. Like, well, let's just use what we've got.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. So I think I can move this somehow. How do I do this?
If you can't, it's not a big deal. I thought you could too. I can take a look.
Yeah, could I? Oh,
So there you go.
That's for projects in a specific repository.
transfer issue. There we go. There we go, everybody. So was this updated? Hey, look at that. Like an integrated service or something. And then I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna add a suggestion here, should be implemented first in RuckPack. Make file target.
And I would say make file target, make file and GitHub workflows, because they're kind of in tandem and used together.
I'm just going to say the existing one should be reevaluated. Does that all look good? I feel like we can get rid of good unit tests if we have that kind of called out down here. Okay. Okay, on that note, we are 10 minutes over. Thank you everybody for your time. So we're going to do asynchronous issue generation for each of these high-level stories. We'll be meeting tomorrow to discuss what gets generated. Hopefully it won't take a full hour, and we will see you guys tomorrow then. Thank you again for everything. Any comments before I end the meeting? All righty.